Hi everyone, it's time for another video on testing and evaluation in English, and this one is actually part 2 if you remember from chapter 3 of our textbook. And last time we looked at some key factors in designing a test, and now today we're going to focus mostly on designing multiple choice items and why they're difficult and how you can do it, and also some things you should look out for. And then at the end, maybe we're going to look at how to actually administer your test and some things that you should keep in mind in terms of scoring as well. Okay, so we're going to start with multiple choice items. And right away from Hughes, we're going to look at the weaknesses of them because they're very common. As you know, probably a lot of the tests you've taken have had multiple choice items on them, but there are some things that you should consider. So when you're designing your test, you should always think about what is the best type of item based on what I want my students to do. Okay, so the list of weaknesses is right here on the screen. So the first one then is that it only tests recognition knowledge, right? There's no output, there's no production. And as we know, guessing can affect the test a lot. And as we're going to see later, if you have a problem with some of the distractors that you've designed, then that increases the chance that they can guess. Or if you only have 3 options, or God forbid, 2 options, then of course you increase the chance that they can just guess and get it right. So for example, if you do a true-false test, then pretty much the lowest score you can expect is 50%, right? If you do it statistically, the students have a 50% chance of guessing on each one. Okay, third one, there's definitely a restriction on what you can test because it is multiple choice. Good items are very difficult to write and they're quite time consuming. There's minimal beneficial washback because actually, for you too, even if a student gets 85% on a multiple choice test, that doesn't really tell you a lot unless you know that that test is very well designed. Okay, and also students are just getting a score, correct or incorrect. And of course, they might be able to cheat. So in a classroom where students are writing ABC on their test, it's a little bit easier for them to look over and see what their partner or their classmate has written. Of course, the biggest advantages are the practicality. Now, practicality is for grading and scoring the test, not for writing it, and also reliability if it's well designed. Okay. So let's look at some multiple choice terminology before we get into actually designing items. So first of all, we have the type of test items that they are. Now they are what we call receptive or selective response. And this is not just multiple choice. It could be true, false, matching list, but any type of item in which the students choose the correct answer from a list of responses. So that's the type of item that it is, in contrast to an open-ended response or essay response or oral production response. Okay, now in terms of multiple choice tests, we have 4 key terms here. The first is the stem. The stem is the body of the multiple choice item that presents the stimulus. I'll show you an example on the next slide. The second one is options or alternatives. So this is the list of choices that the student has when they respond to the STEM. So the STEM is your question. The options are A, blah, 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 B, blah, 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 C, blah, 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 so on. Okay, and then there's the key. The key is the correct response. And then there are the distractors, which are the incorrect responses. And of course, in a good multiple choice test, you want students to think that the distractors are appealing, right? Or else that's one of the reasons why your test might not be good if all your students can know which one is the correct answer because your distractors are not well written. Okay, so here are 4 major guidelines for designing multiple choice items. Now the first 3 are essential. Number 4 is optional for classroom teachers. So the first one is that each item should measure only one objective. And I'll show you what I mean with an example after this. Okay, the next one is that the stems and the options should be stated as simply and directly as possible. You don't want any ambiguity. You don't want irrelevant information. You don't want any extra information that's just going to be a distraction to the students. Remember, your purpose is to test them on some particular objective, or you're measuring some kind of construct. You don't need to add extra language in there just to make it more complicated. Make sure the answer is the only correct answer available. You'd be surprised how many tests I've seen where this is not the case. Okay, so these three are essential. If you're writing your own multiple choice items, you have to make sure that these three are done well. Now, the fourth one is to actually, you can statistically analyze your multiple choice items using some different types of item indices. And you can use those statistics to determine if your items are appropriate for the different level of your students, and also to differentiate between your high level and your low level students. And you can also use them to determine whether your distractors are actually good or not. So I'm going to go through each one right now with some examples. Okay, the first one is that each item should measure only one objective. So let's have a look. Now, every single page where I do this, you should pause the video and you should really look at this question before I talk about it and ask yourself, what do you think? Okay, do you think it's well done or not? And then start your video again and listen to what I say and see if you were thinking kind of in the same way as me. Okay, so for this one, the objective is the teacher wants to test WH questions. Okay, now this one is a listening and then respond type test. So test takers here, where did George go after the party last night? And then on the paper. So this is like your GEPT listening test, right? Test takers read A, yes he did, B, because he was tired, C, to Elaine's place for another party, D, around 11 o'clock. Okay, so as I said, pause it and ask yourself, does this item only measure one objective, which is WH questions, or is there something else being measured? Okay, so here we go. This is the STEM, okay? So I told you before what they are. So the STEM is this. Now, what is the key? The key, of course, is to Elaine's place for another party. Now, this one is only measuring WH questions, so we will say this one is a good question. However, if we're looking at the distractors, you may notice something wrong with the key. And maybe you pointed this out while you paused the video and thought about it by yourself. The key is very long. And oftentimes, if you have one option that is a lot longer than the other ones, it probably signals that that could be the correct answer or the incorrect answer, depending on what it looks like. So when you write your options, try to keep them all similarly structured and in the same length. This book doesn't talk about that specifically, so I thought I'd just throw that in. Okay, so let's look at another example. This time the objective is recognition of the correct word order of indirect questions. So actually this is a very common one for Taiwanese students, right? Excuse me, do you know? And then A says, where is the post office? B, where the post office is. So here are one common mistake that students will make here. And then C says where post office is. So again, pause the video, try to ask yourself, do you think these three options were designed well or not? Okay, so let's have a look here. This one, here's the STEM. So where's the key, A or B? Yes, it's B. Okay, but I have a question for you. And the question is, what's wrong with C? So again, if you didn't think that there was a problem with C, pause the video and think about this for a second. What's wrong with it? You should be able to see that in option C, distractor C, there's something different, right? And that is the article is missing. So if you look and compare A and B, the key difference is the word is. And this is the one that usually gets mixed up, right? Because when we ask a question, where is the post office? That's the standard WH question. However, these are indirect questions. So do you know where the post office is? So as a test taker, you can see, okay, I know it's A or B. But C, they took away the article the. And so now we're also testing articles instead of recognition of word order. So this one is a bad question. And actually, students will probably be able to figure out that it's not C, because I can tell from A and B what the teacher is trying to assess me on. Now that there's an art, and it's exactly like this one, B and C are the same without the article. So this one is a bad distractor. Okay. Next one. The next key factor in designing your multiple choice test. Stems and options should be stated as simply and directly as possible. So, okay, here's the question. My eyesight has really been deteriorating lately. I wonder if I need glasses. I think I'd better go to the blank to have my eyes checked. A, pediatrician. B, dermatologist. C, optometrist. Now, clearly this question is testing vocabulary, the meaning of somebody who checks people's eyes. Okay, so pause it again and ask yourself, is the stem written as simply and directly as possible? Okay, so the answer is no, it's not. There's a lot of extra information here. You don't need to put all of that stuff in the beginning. Now, you could argue with me and say, but Kurt, all that information at the beginning is actually giving context to the question. And I will say, yes, that is true. It is giving context. But this particular question, all we're doing is testing the meaning of those three jobs. You don't need those first two questions to do that. I think I'd better go to the to have my eyes checked. It's very clear that I'm testing you on the particular job. Do you know what an optometrist is? Okay, so shorten the stem. Make it as simple as possible. You're not trying to kill your test takers while they're taking the test. Making them read more than they need to will just give them test fatigue. Okay, next one. So here we go again. We're looking at the same thing. Are the stems and options stated as simply and directly as possible? This time, it's like this. We went to visit the temples, comma, blank, fascinating. So we went to visit the temples, which were beautiful, fascinating, which were especially fascinating, which were wholly fascinating. Okay, so we can tell that the answer is definitely B. The question is, are the options written okay, and is the stem written in a clear, direct way? All right, so again, pause, think about that. Okay, so actually the answer is no. It's not okay this time. And the problem is not with the stem. The stem is fine. It's the options, okay? You don't need to have which were. It's redundant because we're not testing which were. So put that into the stem and just have the three different options in there. So the stem should say, we went to visit the temples, comma, which were blank. And then option A, beautiful. Option B, especially. Option C, wholly. Don't make it more redundant than necessary. Okay, next one. Make sure the answer is the only correct answer available. All right, so we're going back to this question. Again, the objective is WH questions. Test takers here, where did George go after the party last night? And test takers read A, yes he did. B, because he was tired. C, to Elaine's place for another party. D, he went home around 11 o'clock. Okay, so pause, think about it. Now, we already said before what the correct answer was. So ask yourself, is that the only correct answer? Okay, so let me go through it again. So what's the key here? What's the answer? Well, we know from the first time, where did George go after the party last night? The answer was to Elaine's place for another party. But let me ask you a question. How about D? If I asked you, where did George go after the party last night? He went home around 11 o'clock. Now, I know that this is not a direct answer to the question. However, this is what we call an indirect response. And there's a term for it. They are called conversational implicatures. You ask me a question, I answer it, but I answer it in an indirect way. There's a disconnect between the literal message and the intended message. And this is called an implicature of relevance, which means I don't give you a relevant answer, but if you really listen to my intended message, I'm still giving you the answer. So if this was a test question that I took, I would have no idea what the correct answer is. Now, being in Taiwan, I would guess C is probably the answer that the teacher wants, because typically it should directly match the question. However, if you have very high level students or students who like to argue, they will come back at you with response D and say D is also correct. Then how can you argue it? If you tell them that C is the only correct answer, then what you're telling them is that everything has to match the question perfectly. But that's not authentic. The real world doesn't work like that. And so you have to be really careful that you don't do this. So as I wrote here, remember, a lack of context makes more options possibly correct, right? Multiple choice tests don't have a lot of context. So you have to test your options for possible meanings, not only the grammar. So be careful about that. And the only way to know is you have to take the test yourself after you've designed them. Because in your brain, you already know what your correct answer is. So once you're done writing all your items, then you have to sit down, print the test out, and pretend you're the student, read the question, look at the options, and then circle the correct answer. If there's more than one, then you have to fix it. Okay, now the last one, the fourth key factor about multiple choice item designing is that you can actually analyze your items using some simple statistics. Now, it's not difficult to do. However, you may ask yourself whether it's necessary. This is 100% necessary if you're part of writing a standardized exam. Like if you're on the GEPT test designing team, this stuff is very, very important. Or if one day you become a test writer for your school or for the government in terms of entrance exams or something like that, then this stuff has to be done. Okay, so the first one, we have three different indices, okay? The first one is called item facility. Now this means how difficult or easy one particular item is for the test takers. Okay, so the IF stands for item facility, not if, okay? So item facility equals the number of students that answer the item correctly over the number of students who respond to the item. Okay, so here's an example, okay? Oh, sorry, this is item discrimination. Sorry, let me go back to this one. So it's very, very simple. How many students got it correct over the number of students who took it? Now, this is nothing to do with proficiency levels. It's overall. So if 100% of all the students in your class get the question right, then you have to ask yourself, is this question appropriate? Now, there's one other thing I want to say. When you create a test, it's okay maybe to start your multiple choice off. Like maybe you have 10 multiple choice questions or 20. It's okay to start with some very easy ones where 95% of the students get it correct. That's good. That's good for those low-level students to give them some confidence to see something that they can answer in the beginning. And you should progressively make them harder. Start with the easy ones and then go more difficult, because if you start with the difficult ones first, those low-level students will lose all their motivation to answer. But give them some easy ones in the beginning, and then Later on, you can start to separate the high and low level students by making the questions more difficult. Okay, so this is the first one. The second one is called item discrimination. Now, this one is also a simple formula. And the purpose is how well the particular item, okay, not all of them, just one item, how well it distinguishes between the high and the low level students. Because when our test is done, you should have a nice separation between the high level and the low level students, of course, right? If not, then there's something definitely wrong with the test. So if you look at the example, we'll just give some random number, okay? So item 23 on the test, number 23. We've got our top 10 high level students and our bottom 10 low ability students. Okay, so on this particular item, 7 out of 10 high-level students got it right, and 2 out of 10 low-level students got it right. Okay, so 7 right, 3 wrong. 2 right, 8 wrong. So how you figure this one out is you take the items correct in the high group minus the items correct in the low group. So 7 minus 2. Okay, that's on top. So we got 5 on top. And then 0.5 or half of the students in the two groups. So I had 10 high, 10 low, so half of 20 equals 10. So 5 over 10 equals 50%. If this number is 1, then that's perfect discrimination between high and low level. However, I'm not sure you want to get it that high because that means your low level students are getting 0, okay? And the high level students are getting 100. You don't want that unless it's really to prove a point or something. But the closer it gets to 0, the more likely you are to reject it because that question is not telling you any difference between the levels, which means it's not working. Okay, so that's item discrimination. Now the third one is called distractor efficiency. This one doesn't have a formula. You just have to use your own common sense and make your own interpretations. So here is another particular item that has 5 different options. Okay, C is the key, the correct answer. So look at option A, option B, option C, option D, and option E. The high level students, none of them chose A, but 3 low level students did. Okay. So what we're looking for here with distractor efficiency is how effective they are at luring students to select them. So obviously what you should see is you should see more low-level students choosing the other distractors and the high-level students will select them less. That is the most commonsensical way to look at this. And on the correct answer, you should have more high-level students getting it correct than low-level. That's the way that it should work, right? So this one, I think, is any teacher, you can do this after you give your test, and you can really analyze the way that your test looks. So, okay, so let me get back. So A looks okay. B, same. 1 high-level student, 5 low-level. So this one's quite effective because it's got 6 students who have chosen the wrong answer. Okay, then we look at the correct answer. 7 high got it right, 2 low got it wrong. Okay, but D. Now have a look at D. Nobody chose it, which is a very big red flag, right? This means that it's not good and no one is going to choose it. Now, it's possible that you design your test like that on purpose because you want to help your students out. If that's what you're doing, then it's okay. But I mean, why go through the trouble of making a distractor if no one's going to choose it? Okay, now have a look at E. And I want you to pause for a second and think, what's wrong with E? And sorry, not only what's wrong with it, I think that's the obvious part. Why? Why would it be that way? Okay, so hopefully you stopped the video and you thought about this one. If you have a situation like E, clearly this is not okay because it shouldn't be a distractor for high proficient but not for low proficient, which means it could be a few different things, but off the top of my head, I would say that there is something about this distractor that is vague or ambiguous, because your highest proficient students, for them, maybe they know some other rules about English that makes this one correct. Like maybe perhaps in the item I showed before, where did he go after the party? He went home around 11 o'clock. Maybe for the highest proficient students, they may think this one is also correct. But the low level students know it's wrong because it's not a direct answer. Either way, if you have distractors like this, then you have to redesign them, because that's not the way that the test should go. Okay, so just some ways to analyze your test. And I think in the very beginning, when you first start designing multiple choice items, if you have to do that, I know a lot of teachers will buy the tests, but I think you can do this anyways, because, I've looked at some of my own children's multiple choice tests that they've been given at school, and I found a lot of problems with some of the items, especially having more than one correct answer, and also not clear or really ambiguous language used when writing the stems. Okay, so I'll move on now. So this is after you've designed your test. Your test is done, you've written your specifications, you've written all your items, and now what you should do is sit down, print the test out, and do it yourself. And you should actually do it every single time. If you have a listening section, play the CD, play the audio file, and do the test. I do it for every single test that I give my students, because first of all, you'll find your mistakes. Second of all, you have to go through all these questions. Now, some of them you should just do it innately, because you're a teacher and you should know that these are the things you're looking for. Okay, so number one, are the directions for each section clear? Does each section have an example? If you don't have an example, are the directions in the format familiar enough for them so they already know how to do it? Clearly, if it's multiple choice, they should know. But if it's not, maybe you need to give an example. Does each item measure an ability or construct? Does each item have only one correct answer? Is each item stated in clear, simple language? Does each multiple choice item have appropriate distractors, which means the wrong ones are clearly wrong, but they still will lure the test takers? It's possible that you design this fantastic test, but your distractors are so bad that everybody gets 100 on the multiple choice because it's just really obvious which is the right answer. Is the difficulty level appropriate? Is the language as authentic as possible, if it's possible? Is there a balance between easy and difficult items? So make sure not all of the items are too hard. Remember, your English classrooms are going to have a lot of low proficient students. Don't kill them on the test if possible. Try to let them have some successes. And do the items and the test reflect the learning objective? Remember, it has to match the objectives that you are trying to have your students meet in class. Okay, administering the test, a lot of this stuff is common sense, but we may forget to do it, especially in the beginning. So this is something you should always come back and look at later. Pre-test, make sure you provide the appropriate pre-test information. So let students know what the test conditions are going to be like. How much time can they use their electronic devices? Will there be breaks? What if they need to go to the bathroom? How will that work? Things like that. What are the materials that they'll need? Do they need a dictionary, pencil, pen, anything like that? What kind of item types are going to be on the test? And give them some strategies, study strategies, and also test-taking strategies. How can they prepare? Tell them not to cram the night before, just like you guys. You should actually go to bed early the night before a test. It's much better for your overall effectiveness. And also let them know what the evaluation criteria will be. Review the key content or components that you covered, and try to give the students a chance to ask you questions. Not just what does the test look like, but what will the content be, and maybe a little bit of review. Let them ask you, what did that mean? I don't really get something. Try to be very welcoming about this part. Okay, the next is actual test administration. So on test day, make sure you get to class early and set everything up. Run the equipment, make sure the internet's on, the speaker's working. Have any extra paper for students who write too much, or make sure you have enough tests. Count them. Even if you send it to the copy room, make sure you actually count them first. It's very, very embarrassing when you don't have enough tests for all the students in class. Start on time, give the students a test, and then sit at your desk quietly and pay attention to them. Be available in case they have questions. Don't be noisy. I've seen teachers answer phone calls and talk to other teachers while the students are giving a test. This is really rude in my opinion, because the students are trying to focus and you are in the classroom talking. So try not to do that stuff. And remind students about the time as they're writing. So what I like to do, if it's a long test, like maybe a 2-hour test or a 50-minute test, whatever, is I write on the blackboard 50 minutes, and then every 10 minutes I'll erase it and then go down to 40. Or you can just put a timer or a clock on the whiteboard or on the screen as well. Okay, scoring and grading, I'm not going to talk very much about it now because later on in the textbook we're going to have a whole chapter on it. But in terms of scoring and grading when you're preparing, scoring refers to the points you're going to give for each item in each section. So Section 1 is worth 10%, Section 2 is worth 40%. Each individual question, how many points is it worth? You should really figure this out in the very beginning and make sure it's appropriate. If they have 5 multiple choice questions and it's worth 50% of their test, you get 2 wrong, you're in big, big trouble, right? So make sure that you really design a system that appropriately reflects what you're trying to do in the course. What is the most important content? Don't give them some super difficult question that's worth 40%, and then no one will get a good score unless they are a superstar. So use your common sense about that. And then grading, of course, is the number or letter that you're going to put on the test paper. As I mentioned, we're going to talk about this later, but this really depends. It depends on, what are the standards at your school, and what are your own personal standards? What's the passing grade? If they need a 60 to pass, then where should your class average be? You should start thinking in this way. So you don't want everyone to get 95, right? And you don't want everyone to get 65. So you have to start thinking about how will your grades match what you want. But there are ways to deal with this later. Like, for example, if you find that your test was too easy, you can curve the grades a little bit downwards so that everybody has still the same relative score to each other, but maybe you deduct points a little bit. There are ways to deal with this later. Okay, the last part of this video is giving feedback. So very quickly, some ways to give feedback after the test. So in general, you can give them a letter grade, a total score, or some sub-scores. For responses to a listening or reading test item, you give them an indication of correct or incorrect. You can give them a diagnostic set of scores, so scores on different grammatical categories, for example. And you can give them a checklist of areas needing work and strategic options. So don't ever just write, you need to improve your listening. If the student is struggling, that's not going to help them. Give them some strategies, like tell them, you need to listen more to minimal pairs because you can't tell the difference between beat and bit. So go back and listen to my CD, blah, 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 what number, something like that. Be specific. For oral production test, you can give scores for each element being rated. You can give them a checklist again. You can give them oral feedback after the performance, which is good, but maybe they will forget what you said because they're nervous. And you can have a conference after to go over the results as well. So for written essays, again, you can give them scores for each element. You give them a checklist and strategies, techniques to improve their writing, help them, guide them which way to go. And you can give marginal and end of essay comments and suggestions. So overall, what can you do? I think it's more effective though, personally, to write the comments at the source instead of at the very end saying, oh, you need to work on your past tense. Circle all those verbs where tense is wrong and write the comments in that area. And then again, you can have a conference. Okay, and additional or alternative feedback. So you can give feedback on all or selected parts of a test, like I said. But you can also have peer conferences. So you can get together with your peers and then the teacher can join. You can have whole class discussions, which you should go through the test together as a class. You can have individual conferences, and you can have students do self-assessment as well. All right, everybody, that's it for this video. Take care, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.